When an avoidant and an empath both choose no contact, something happens that very few people ever talk about. And it is usually not what everyone expects. Most people believe the empath is the one who completely breaks down. Most people assume the avoidant walks away without feeling anything, like they are fine, peaceful, and untouched by what happened. But the reality inside both of them is much more complex. What happens after the silence begins is not simple. It is not just a breakup, it is a deep emotional shift that affects both people in completely different ways. Because when these two types of people disconnect, they do not only lose each other, they lose the emotional reflection they were using to see parts of themselves they could not see alone. And once that reflection disappears, everything changes. Stay with me because over the next few minutes, we are going to explore what happens inside both of them after no contact begins, how their emotions change over time, and why so many people make the same mistake that pulls them back into the exact same pattern again. If you have ever experienced a connection like this, or you are currently trying to understand one, you are going to recognize many of these moments. Before we continue, write the word mirror in the comments. Just one word. It shows that you are truly here, that you are listening, and it helps this message reach someone who may need to hear it today. And if you enjoy understanding human emotions, relationships, and deeper psychological patterns, subscribe because this is exactly the kind of content we create. Now, let us begin at the exact point where everything changes. The moment no contact starts. Not the moment someone thinks about doing it, not the late night conversations with friends, not the endless questions about whether it is the right decision, the real moment, the final message, the last conversation, the final goodbye, the second when the connection suddenly becomes silence. That exact moment creates two completely different experiences. For the empath, it can feel like falling into an unknown place where every emotion becomes louder. For the avoidant, it can initially feel like a weight has been lifted, like they finally have space to breathe again. And inside those opposite reactions is where the entire emotional cycle begins. To understand why this happens, you have to understand what these two people often bring into the relationship without even realizing it. The empath is someone who experiences emotions deeply, not just in a romantic or dramatic way, but in a very real and intense way. They notice things others ignore. They sense changes in energy. They recognize when someone is upset even before that person admits it to themselves. They pay attention to small details, a different tone of voice, a shorter reply, a change in behavior, a quiet moment that feels different. They are constantly reading the emotional environment around them. In a relationship, this can make them incredibly connected to their partner. They can feel what is happening beneath the surface. But the same ability that makes them deeply caring can also become exhausting because they often carry emotions that do not even belong to them. When they are with an avoidant partner, this sensitivity becomes both a strength and a source of pain. The avoidant is someone who often learned through past experiences that emotional closeness can feel unsafe. This does not always come from one dramatic event. Sometimes it comes from growing up around emotional distance. Sometimes feelings were ignored. Sometimes vulnerability was uncomfortable. Sometimes expressing needs was met with rejection, criticism, or simply no response at all. Over time, the person learns a quiet lesson. Depending on others is risky. Showing too much emotion can lead to disappointment. Staying independent feels safer. As they grow older, they may still want love and connection, but another part of them becomes afraid when that connection becomes too deep. They desire closeness, but they also fear what closeness requires. And when an empath and an avoidant come together, something powerful and painful can happen at the same time. The empath often feels like they have discovered someone special, someone with hidden layers, someone carrying wounds they do not show the world. They see the good underneath the walls. They believe that with enough patience, understanding, and love, those walls might finally come down. The avoidant, meanwhile, may experience something they rarely feel, being deeply understood. The empath notices things they never explain. They feel seen without having to reveal every part of themselves. That can feel comforting. It can feel rare. It can feel like finally meeting someone who understands them without forcing them to explain their inner world. But this is also where the pattern can become complicated, because the empath may start giving more and more emotional energy, hoping their love will create safety. And the avoidant may begin depending on that emotional support while still struggling to fully open themselves. This creates a connection that feels incredibly strong, but also incredibly difficult to maintain. They understand them, they notice the things nobody else notices, and they accept parts of them that they usually keep hidden from the world. This is why they can become connected so quickly, almost like two people who were somehow designed to find each other, but also carrying the exact wounds that can make the relationship painful. The relationship often develops a familiar pattern. The empath moves closer. The avoidant creates distance. The empath feels the distance and tries even harder to reconnect. The avoidant feels the increasing emotional intensity and pulls away even more. The empath begins to believe the problem is that they have not given enough, loved enough, or tried hard enough. So they offer more patience. They give more understanding. They sacrifice more of themselves. They slowly make themselves smaller just to keep the connection alive. But the avoidant, feeling the weight of that emotional closeness, often experiences it as pressure and retreats further. This creates a cycle that can continue for a very long time. Sometimes it lasts for months, sometimes years. Sometimes people remain trapped in this pattern for decades without understanding why they cannot break free, until eventually something changes, until one person reaches a point where they simply cannot continue the same way anymore. Sometimes the empath becomes completely emotionally exhausted. Sometimes the avoidant reaches a point where the intensity feels impossible to handle. And sometimes both people reach that breaking point at almost the exact same time. That is usually when no contact begins. But here is what most people do not understand. No contact is not just the absence of messages, calls, or conversations. It is not simply two people choosing silence. It becomes a completely different type of communication. A conversation that no longer happens through words, but through memories, emotions, thoughts, and everything each person is forced to face internally. And what happens inside both people during that silence can be completely different. Two people can be experiencing the same separation while living through two opposite emotional realities. Let us look at the empath first. The first day of no contact usually does not feel peaceful for them. It does not feel like freedom. It does not feel like a victory. Instead, it often feels like stepping into an emotional storm where everything suddenly becomes uncertain. The empath's mind and body have spent so much time paying attention to the relationship that suddenly losing that connection creates a shock. For months or even years, they may have been monitoring every emotional change from their partner, every message, every pause, every shift in tone, every moment of distance. Their attention was constantly searching for signs that the relationship was safe or in danger, and then suddenly the signal disappears. But the system that was searching for that signal does not immediately stop. It keeps looking. They may check their phone repeatedly, not because they lack strength, but because their mind is still trying to find reassurance. It is searching for the familiar sign that says, everything is okay. They replay conversations again and again, not because they want to hurt themselves, but because their brain is trying to solve the mystery. They search for the exact moment things changed, the sentence they should have said differently, the action they should have taken, the moment they could have prevented the distance. They are trying to understand what happened because understanding feels like a way to regain control. And then comes the guilt. Even when the relationship caused them pain, even when they were the one who decided to step away, they may still feel responsible for the other person's emotions. The idea that their avoidant partner might be hurting, struggling, or silently needing them can feel incredibly difficult to carry. But beneath the phone checking, the memories, and the guilt, there is a deeper question that many empaths eventually face. A question that can completely shake their sense of identity. If I am no longer taking care of this person, then who am I? because many empaths have spent years becoming the person who understands everyone else, the person who feels everything, the person who supports others through their hardest moments. They become the emotional safe place for people around them. And when that role suddenly disappears, they may feel lost because they are no longer standing inside the role they built themselves around. They are standing alone, trying to discover who they are without constantly carrying someone else's emotions. This is not simply weakness, it is a deeply human reaction to losing something that became a major part of their emotional world. Now, let us look at the avoidant side. The first day of no contact can feel very different. In the beginning, many avoidant people experience something that surprises even them: relief. And sometimes they feel uncomfortable because they feel relieved. They may experience guilt for feeling lighter, but then quickly push that guilt away because guilt requires them to sit with emotions. And sitting with intense emotions is often exactly what they struggle with. But the initial relief is real. The pressure feels gone. The fear of disappointing someone feels quieter. The feeling of being expected to open up in ways they are not ready for seems to disappear. The emotional intensity that felt overwhelming becomes distant. And for the first several days, sometimes even the first couple of weeks, they may honestly believe they are completely fine. They stay busy, they focus on tasks, they fill their schedule. This is one of the ways they protect themselves from uncomfortable emotions. They work more, they exercise more, they reconnect with old routines, they start new projects, they create a life full of movement because constant activity leaves less space for difficult feelings to appear. And for a while, this strategy works, but then something slowly begins to change. Usually, somewhere after a few weeks, the silence starts feeling different. It stops feeling like peaceful independence and begins feeling strangely empty. There are small moments they cannot predict. A funny moment happens, and their first instinct is to tell the empath. They hear a song connected to a memory. They experience a difficult day and naturally want to reach out. For a brief second, their mind moves toward the person who used to be there. Then reality returns. That person is no longer available, and that moment creates a feeling they may not know how to process. So they do what they have learned to do. They explain it away. They convince themselves they are better without the relationship. They focus on the problems. They remind themselves why it was difficult, why the empath felt overwhelming, why the emotional needs felt like too much. But ignoring emotions takes energy, and eventually that constant effort of pushing feelings away starts becoming exhausting. Because many avoidant people have become extremely skilled at staying away from uncomfortable emotions. If they become quiet enough beneath all the busyness and constant movement, they may discover something they were not expecting. They miss the empath, not always in some dramatic, overwhelming way at the beginning, not in a way that immediately feels like a movie scene. It is usually much quieter than that. It appears as a small emptiness, a strange feeling that something important is missing. The kind of feeling you experience when you lose something you did not fully understand the value of until it was no longer there. But the avoidant usually does not describe it as missing someone. They often do not even allow themselves to use that word. Instead, they explain it differently. They tell themselves they are simply adjusting. They say they need time. They say they are focusing on themselves. They say they are rebuilding their routine or getting their life organized again. And they continue moving forward because movement feels safer than sitting still with emotions. Meanwhile, somewhere around the second or third week of no contact, the empath begins experiencing their own internal shift. The intense emotional chaos starts becoming quieter. It is not complete peace yet. It is more like a tired stillness after a long emotional storm. But inside that stillness, something powerful begins to happen. The empath starts reconnecting with themselves. Because when someone spends months or years constantly focused on another person's emotions, reactions, moods, and needs, their own inner voice slowly becomes harder to hear. They become so focused on understanding someone else that they forget to understand themselves. They begin confusing their partner's feelings with their own feelings. They become like an instrument constantly responding to another person's rhythm while forgetting what their own natural rhythm sounds like. But when the connection disappears, when there is no longer someone to analyze, support, or emotionally chase, a different kind of silence appears. And inside that silence, the empath begins hearing something they have ignored for a long time: themselves. And what they discover is not always comfortable, because many empaths eventually realize that what they believed was only love may have also contained something deeper, something difficult to admit, a strong desire to feel needed, a fear of being alone with their own emptiness, a belief that saving someone else could give their own life more meaning. They begin asking questions they avoided before. Why did I stay in a situation where I was constantly hurting? Why did I see their distance as a challenge to prove my love instead of recognizing that something was not balanced? Why did my value become connected to whether or not I could finally reach someone who kept creating distance? These questions can hurt, but they are important questions. And when the empath starts asking them, it is often the beginning of real emotional growth. Now, while the empath is looking inward and discovering hidden parts of themselves, the avoidant begins facing a completely different emotional battle. Around the 1 month to 6 week point, something starts happening inside them that becomes harder to ignore. Their emotional defenses begin weakening. They start remembering. They start idealizing. Human memory is not like a perfect video recording. It changes depending on our emotional state. When someone is experiencing hidden pain, the mind often highlights the beautiful moments and softens the painful ones. This is not because someone is pretending, it is simply how memory works when emotions are involved. And slowly, the avoidant may stop remembering the empath as the person who felt overwhelming or demanding. Instead, they begin remembering the warmth, the support, the comfort, the feeling of being understood. They remember the beginning when the connection felt exciting and safe, when the empath's ability to notice them felt special instead of exposing, when being deeply seen felt like a gift instead of something frightening. They begin missing an image of the relationship that focuses heavily on the good moments, almost like watching a collection of the best memories instead of the full story. And this is where no contact becomes extremely difficult for the avoidant, because their longing, their discomfort, and their desire to escape painful emotions can combine into a powerful urge to reconnect. Here is the part many people misunderstand. The avoidant who reaches out after silence is not always reaching out because they have transformed. Sometimes they are reaching out because the pain of absence has become stronger than their fear of emotional closeness. The same person who pulled away when connection felt intense may suddenly want connection when distance begins to hurt. That does not automatically mean they have done the inner work required to create a healthier relationship. It may simply mean they are reacting to the discomfort of losing access to someone who brought emotional safety into their life. And that is why the message often arrives in a very casual way: a simple text, a small check-in, something that feels harmless. Hey, I was thinking about you. I saw something that reminded me of you. How have you been? A message that looks simple on the surface but carries a huge emotional impact. Because when that message appears on the empath's phone after weeks of silence, it can feel like everything they secretly hoped for has finally happened. It can feel like proof that their patience mattered, proof that their love reached the other person, proof that the avoidant finally understands their value. It can feel like the moment they were waiting for without admitting they were waiting. But this is also the most fragile moment in the entire process, because if nothing has changed internally, the old pattern does not disappear. It returns. The empath feels hope and begins opening their heart again. They begin giving more, understanding more, trying more. The avoidant feels the emotional closeness returning and begins feeling pressure again. Slowly, the distance returns. The same cycle begins. The same pain repeats. Unless something different happened during the silence. Unless one or both people use that time to truly grow. And this difference is what matters most. Real change does not come from missing someone. It does not come from fear of losing someone. It comes from doing the difficult internal work that changes how a person connects. For the empath, that work begins with understanding why this type of love felt so powerful in the first place. Because the truth is, the intensity was not accidental. The endless waiting, the emotional highs and lows, the moments of closeness followed by distance, the feeling that love had to be earned again and again. These patterns often feel familiar because for many people, they connect to early emotional experiences. They may have learned that love comes with uncertainty, that attention must be earned, that being needed is the same as being loved. So when they meet someone who moves closer and then pulls away, a deeper part of them recognizes the pattern. And they may believe that if they can finally make this person stay, finally make them choose them consistently, then something inside them will finally feel healed. But that healing cannot come from another person's acceptance. That is the difficult truth and also the freeing truth. The empath must learn how to give themselves the same care, patience, and understanding they have spent so much time giving everyone else.